From a season plagued with defensive struggles and constant mismatches, to the harsh reality of relying too heavily on just two-star players, here's why the Mavericks were never going to win the 2024 playoffs. Throughout the regular season, the Dallas Mavericks faced significant challenges, particularly on the defensive end. The team ranked 18th in defense, a glaring weakness when coming up against other top-tier playoff teams that were known for their strong defensive capabilities. The Mavericks' defense struggled to contain opponents, which became a critical issue as the season progressed. One of the most significant factors contributing to this defensive deficiency was the inconsistency in their defensive plays. Despite adding players like Daniel Gafford, who was expected to bolster their defense, the Mavs really couldn't establish a good defensive identity to save themselves even if they wanted to. Gafford, while a strong presence in the paint, often found himself overextended due to the lack of support from perimeter defenders. This resulted in opponents frequently exploiting gaps in the Mavericks' defense, leading to easy scoring opportunities and turnovers. The Mavericks' struggles were easy to see when facing teams with versatile offenses. For instance, the Oklahoma City Thunder exposed Dallas's defensive vulnerabilities through their dynamic and adaptable offensive plays. The Thunder, known for their ability to spread the floor and create mismatches, capitalized on the Mavericks' defensive lapses. They utilized pick and rolls and off-ball movements to create open shots and drive lanes, putting immense pressure on the Mavs' defense. One key game that highlighted these issues was the Mavs' matchup against the Thunder in March. During this game, the Thunder's guards and forwards consistently exploited mismatches, drawing Gafford and other big men out of the paint and attacking the rim with ease. The Thunder's ability to break down the Mavericks' defensive game really showcased the lack of depth and versatility in Dallas's roster. The Mavs also struggled big time with their perimeter defense, allowing opponents to shoot a high percentage from beyond the arc. Teams with strong three-point shooting capabilities found it relatively easy to get open looks against them. The inability to effectively close out on shooters and rotate defensively was a consistent theme that kept playing on the Mavericks throughout the season. Now, if we flip to the winner's side as a comparison though, the Boston Celtics demonstrated the importance of a strong defensive foundation. The Celtics, who are ranked among the top teams in defensive efficiency, is all thanks to the presence of elite defenders that can play well together. Their ability to switch seamlessly on defense and contest shots at a high level was a massive difference compared to the Mavericks' disjointed defensive efforts. The Mavs' defensive struggles were not just limited to specific games, but were really a season-long issue. Their inability to consistently perform on the defensive end raised questions about their preparedness for the high-stakes environment of the playoffs. The psychological impact of these defensive lapses can't be understated either. Players often found themselves under immense pressure to compensate for defensive shortcomings, leading to mental fatigue and errors. We really saw this in games when the Mavs held leads but failed to close out and hold onto it due to defensive breakdowns in those crucial moments. Losing Game 5 was a prime example. It seemed like none of the players could hit a shot. They simply didn't show up to win. The Mavs' season-long defensive struggles and mismatch issues painted a clear picture of their vulnerabilities. Their inability to maintain a strong defensive presence, combined with the tactical exploitation by opponents, really shows why the Mavericks were never realistically going to win the 2024 playoffs. Another thing we can't overlook, though, is that a major issue for the Mavs was their heavy dependence on Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. While having star players like Luka and Kyrie is undoubtedly an asset, the Mavericks' reliance on these two players exposed several weaknesses in their overall team strategy and depth. The high dependence on Doncic and Irving made the Mavericks' offense predictable. Teams' defenses could easily just focus their efforts on limiting the impact of these two players, knowing that the Mavs lacked consistent secondary scoring options. This predictability became particularly problematic in the playoffs, where teams can game plan specifically to just shut down two key players. Despite their individual brilliance, Doncic and Irving often faced double teams and intense defensive pressure, which hindered their ability to perform at their peak levels, adding further pressure and stress which just ended up making them miss easy shots. In the regular season, Doncic averaged an impressive 28.9 points per game, while Irving contributed significantly as well. But this scoring output masked a deeper issue. The Mavericks struggled to find reliable contributors beyond their two main stars. When either Doncic or Irving had an off night, the team's offensive efficiency plummeted, meaning that this over-reliance was evident in crucial games where one or both stars struggled to perform at their peak levels, significantly lowering the Mavericks' chances of winning. Now, obviously, getting to Game 5 of the playoffs is massive. but the physical and mental toll on Doncic and Irving was considerable. Over a long playoff series, the burden of carrying the offensive load became really easy to see. The fatigue set in, affecting their performance and decision-making. Doncic and Irving were visibly exhausted by the end of the fourth quarter of most of the games they played, all because they played heavy minutes throughout the season to compensate for mismanagement of the team's skill levels. The Mavericks bench players and role players did not consistently step up to support Doncic and Irving either though. Players like PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford had sporadic impacts, but their contributions were not enough to offset the heavy reliance on the star duo. Unlike teams with deep benches, the Mavericks couldn't rely on their role players to consistently step up when needed. Then you've got teams like the Celtics that showed the importance of having multiple reliable scoring options and a deep bench. The Celtics had several players who could step up offensively, reducing the pressure on their stars. This depth allowed them to maintain high performance even when their starters rested, a luxury the Mavericks lacked. And of course, having a duo that actually play incredibly well together is a whole different story. The Mavericks' over-reliance on Doncic and Irving left them vulnerable. When teams succeeded in limiting the two stars, the Mavericks had no plan B. This one-dimensional offensive strategy was the main reason why the Mavericks were never realistically going to win as it got deeper into the playoffs. The playoffs require a well-rounded team effort, and the Mavericks' lack of depth and over-reliance on their star players was a glaring weakness that ultimately led to their downfall. Another critical factor that contributed to the ultimate demise of the Mavs was the coaching mismatches they faced. Head coach Jason Kidd found himself frequently outmaneuvered by his counterparts, which exposed strategic weaknesses that really hindered the team's performance. Jason Kidd's time with the Mavericks has had its ups and downs, but the 24 season highlighted some glaring issues in his coaching strategy. One of the primary concerns was Kidd's in-game adjustments, or rather, the lack thereof. Throughout the season and into the playoffs, Kidd often struggled to make effective adjustments in response to the strategies of other coaches. This was particularly evident against the Oklahoma City Thunder, where Mark Daigneault outcoached Kidd on several fronts. Mark's ability to exploit the Mavericks' weaknesses was a key factor in the Thunder's success. He implemented defensive schemes that effectively neutralized Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, forcing other players to step up, which they failed to do consistently. Mark also made smart offensive adjustments, utilizing the Thunder's versatile lineup to create mismatches and exploit the Mavericks' defensive lapses. I think Joe Mazzulla really learned from this and was able to pick the Mavs apart when it really mattered in the finals. Kidd's reluctance to deviate from his preferred rotations and strategies often left the Mavericks vulnerable. For instance, he persisted with guard-heavy lineups that struggled defensively, even when it became clear that a more balanced approach was needed. This inflexibility was costly in close games where timely adjustments could have made a difference, and ultimately costly when they lost Game 5. The Mavericks also faced issues with their defensive strategy under Kidd's leadership. The team's defensive rotations were often slow and ineffective, allowing opponents to find open shots and capitalize on mismatches. This was particularly problematic against teams like the Celtics, who used their speed and versatility to keep the Mavericks' defense off balance. Despite having defensive talents like Daniel Gafford, Kidd's strategies failed to maximize their potential, resulting in a defense that was often porous and easily exploited. Successful playoff teams like the Boston Celtics demonstrated the importance of effective coaching. Joe Mazzulla was able to make rapid in-game adjustments, optimizing their lineups and strategies to counter their opponent's strengths. This adaptability was a key factor in their ability to advance through the playoffs and ultimately winning, which is probably why the Celtics will come back next year for another title. So from a pretty easy Game 5 victory for the Celtics to the Mavs having a lot to fix in the offseason, that's why the Mavs were never going to win the playoffs.